Hey Matt, thanks for
Hey,
welcoming me up to the stage.
yeah, do you approve of the slides? I know you like
Yeah,
slides.
I always do. No, I say that in general, but honestly, they are incredibly helpful, and I think you did an excellent job with
Oh,
the slides. So
thanks.
I do really appreciate it. There was a lot to get through, and I was kind of reassembling my entire PC. I was on phone listening while I was doing that, so I've
Oh,
got
wow,
that done.
nice.
But multitasking while doing that, I was hoping to address your example of the hemispherectomy because I think it's very interesting, and I think we can by exploring that we can kind of say a lot.
Okay.
Um, so. I, yes, hemispherectomies are a very real procedure that
Yeah.
we need to consider. Something very similar to that that has been done is also something called a corpus callosumati. I'm not probably not pronouncing that correctly, but it's a extreme treatment in the case of seizures where they destroy the connective tissue connecting the two halves of the brain. So both halves are still alive in a person, but they are no longer communicating with each other in any
Yeah.
way. So
hmm
the left half doesn't know what the right half is doing, and so forth. And likewise, your perceptive signals are not being shared. So whatever you see in your left eye, your left side, because it crisscrosses, doesn't know anything about. Um,
Yeah.
in that
If
case,
memory serves, that's a treatment for severe epilepsy. If memory serves.
yes, that is correct. It may be used for some other things, but it's definitely for use for severe epilepsy. In that case, we have an interesting situation where if a person is not equivalent to their brains, we can explore how this interacts with it. So let's say we do this, we're mad scientists, and we take this to an extreme. So both halves are still alive. What if we separate them into two bodies and they have separate sensory information? So, one half of the brain can be in China while the other half can be on the other side of the world in America, and they can do separate things. Do you think you would, in any way, what is you? Would have perceptive information from both halves because we actually have experiments with people who have this done and they actually cannot tell like essentially one half is communicating cannot tell what the other half is seeing or feeling at all.
Now we don't have examples of transplanting the
We
halves.
don't have people we haven't transplanted this into another brain. That's the realm of science fiction. But for
Okay.
people who have this, they can like feel an object on one side with their hand, but they don't recognize it. They won't be able to perceive. Oh, they could their linguistic center, so they could write down what they were touching, but they could not orally say it, if that makes sense, because the
hmm
two sections are not in the same area, I believe. I'd have to review the experiments. But I'm just curious, do you think they would become two people if we separated your brain or my brain and they were allowed to have divergent, very different experiences and very different interactions with the world, and they never really communicated with each other at all?
Sure. So actually, Richard Swinburne uses this as an example for the existence of the soul, because he says that we want to be able to account for the continuity of identity after such a procedure, and he actually imagines doing the transplant that you suggested. So I'm wondering if you have you read Swinburne? Is that where you're getting it from,
No,
or
but I think it's an interesting example, and I
okay?
think it to explore. So I haven't read specifically his description of the situation.
Yeah, so he takes it a step further and says, let's say you've got three people, person A, person B, and person C, and let's say that you take person A, poor person A, you cut their brain in half, and you transplant, the left half into person B, the right half into person C. Then how do you account for the continuity of identity? And the problem here is, let's suppose that the person B and person C now have the same memories as person A. They both have the memory of being person
Mhm.
A. Well, what happens? What happens with that? Well, if you're identical to your brain, then it seems like neither of them would be identical to person A. And so, but they have the memories and they have the same substance continuing. So he actually thinks that that gives us good reason to think that there must be something else that accounts for continuity of identity. Whether that's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can transplant brains into other people's brains or not. But what I would say is that it's sort of like if you had a car, and imagine that something had gone horribly wrong with your car, and you had the steering wheel on one side and the brake and gas pedals on the other side. So the brake and the gas are on the passenger side, and the steering wheel's on the driver's side. Well, you would only be able to operate one at a time. You'd either be on the gas or on the brakes or be at the wheel, but you would never be at both at the same time. But that wouldn't show that there's not a driver. just because you can only use part of it at a time. And one of the things that J.P. Moreland actually, he talks about that experiment. And apparently, if you put a card in their nose so that you block off their field of view, then what you'll have is if they're looking at an object that's on their left side, they won't remember what's on the right, and you'll be able to like almost get like almost a split personality.
Hmm.
But if you remove the card, it goes back and it unifies again to where they'll remember now what's on both sides. Which I think shows that there's nothing about removing the card that divides the person or has an impact on the number of persons that there are. Obviously, just pulling an object away from your front of your face doesn't do that. And so what I think that shows is that it's not really a challenge to the existence of the soul. That said, at best, suppose you can get a situation where you have two distinct streams of consciousness happening at the same time. Let's suppose you could do that. Well, even in that case, it wouldn't show that there isn't a mental substance that's having that stream of consciousness. It wouldn't show that the stream of consciousness is the physical. At best, it would just show that up till now we've thought that the mental substance of humans could only have one stream of consciousness at a time, but it could have two collections of properties. In fact, that's much what Christianity says about God, is that God has multiple streams of consciousness. And so I don't think that it's a challenge to the existence of mental substances that they would have more than one stream of consciousness, and that's a worst case scenario.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that you would say, even though we split it up, there is still one mental substance there? There's not two. It's not like there's two people. There's one person. They may be unusual because of that, but there's still
Yeah.
only one person, one mental substance, correct?
I would say I think that there's only one person, one mental substance, but at the same time, would it be a challenge to say there's two? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, humans reproduce, and so and we have twinning, for example, where if a person, their cells divide or separate at the right time, then you get a whole other person involved. And so it seems like there are states of affairs where mental substances can give rise to additional mental substances. So I don't have any problem with saying that under the right conditions, a mental substance could give rise to another mental substance. And sort of like a human cell divides, and there's now two daughter cells. So I think even in the absolute worst case scenario where you do have two persons, two individual selves, I still don't think that would imply that there isn't a mental self involved.
Well, I'll have to be a bit careful with that because I thought mental substances, as you had defined them earlier, were essentially indivisible. They had was it fundamental? Essentially, there you can't. I don't think I understood you maybe properly, so maybe I'm misunderstanding this. But
Oh,
aren't they?
what I meant by fundamental is that they're not had by other. And that's true of substances in generally. So,
Okay.
like a desk isn't had by anything else. Now, a desk is composed of parts, but it's not had by something else. It is the thing that has properties of brownness and density and volume and all that. And so that's what I meant by a substance being fundamental, is that it's not had by other things.
So mental substances, I guess I'm trying to figure out, can they be divided or can they not be? You think they can be?
I don't think that they can be divided, but I think that they can give rise to new mental substances because we have kids, and so
Oh,
I have a kid. So
okay.
obviously, her mental substance, her soul came from somewhere, and so I think it came from her mom and I. So I think under the right conditions, mental substances can give rise to new mental substances.
What's the distinction between a mental substance sort of change versus a new mental substance? So, like, what we think of as me or mental substance, I assume it can undergo some changes. Like, I can start liking golf and then I can start not liking golf, and I'm the same mental substance. So the properties can change, but I'm the same mental substance. So what makes something a new mental substance versus an old mental substance changing? So, for example, if we split the brain and there's how do we say these are two new mental substances versus just the same mental substance changing in two different ways?
Well, so substances can change properties. So you can change the property of liking golf to you can change as a substance by having the property of liking golf changing to not having the property of not liking golf, and that's true whether you are your brain or whether you are a soul. As the substance that you are can change, and so that's how a substance would change. So as far as how does substance stay the same? Well, if it's just changing properties, then it would just be the same substance that changes properties. But if it's a different substance, then it would be a different thing, a different fundamental thing.
Well, I guess if we compare two substances, so we have a substance which is originally me. We have a substance where I change to liking golf, and then we have another substance totally separate, but it is identical in every way to the substance of me liking golf. There's no continuity there. It was separately created. It just happens to have all the same interests, memories, and stuff similar to the me that likes golf, but there's no continuity. It just simply sprung into existence.
Well, I don't
How
think
do
that
we tell?
I don't think there could be a thing that has all and only the same
Okay,
properties as you and isn't you.
perhaps that's a bit too abstracted. If I can have a little bit more of your time, I'd like to go back to
Sure.
maybe
We'll
an
give like
interesting example.
one more
Go ahead.
exchange, and then I've got Sabrina, patiently waiting, so I'll go to her after that.
Sounds good. Kind of the opposite of a corpus callosumati or splitting brains is human chimerism. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is where essentially two fertilized embryos merge during gestation. And so what you have is a person that's essentially comprised of two embryos. They have potentially two separate sets of DNA, two embryos that have merged. So they could have, is that in sense two people then that are treated as one person? Is that two mental substances?
I mean, I guess I'd have to interview the person as an adult to find out. I would assume that one of them does not survive that procedure. So that would be my assumption, is that one dies and the other survives. Sort of like Dwight Schrute, who resorbed his twin. I would think that the twin doesn't survive that. I guess I don't know, that's what I would think. But I'll let you have the last word, and then we'll go to Sabrina.
Sure. I guess where I would ultimately like to take this is a case like Henrietta Lacks, whose cells are still alive today, but have been split, and they're significantly different than what we think of as a person. But if you take somebody's brain and you say preserve their tissue and clone the rest of their body, are they still alive? Or how much can you divide a brain and it still be the person? Like, if I take individual atoms and remove those, separate those, and then somebody else consumes them and they become part of their brain, is that the same person, or is that now a different person? That's the general gist of the direction I was taking it. Where exactly
Okay.
does a person, quote unquote, die and become a new person?
Well, I'm not a physicalist, and so for me, the person doesn't depend on the physical, and so somebody eating the brain, as gross as that is, doesn't imply that the mental substance is somehow incorporated into them, just because the physical substance is.
But I mean, if you can split a brain into as many pieces as you want and not destroy the mental substance, the person is still alive, since the tissue is still alive. What does that say about the individual particles being preserved? Like, how much can you break down the tissue and it still be considered alive and persistent?
I
Like, if
don't.
I remove my brain into individual cells and each of those cells is still kept alive, am I still alive even though there's no interaction between those neurons? Am I still a person?
I think you're still a person because I think you're a mental substance. Whether I don't think a brain could survive that being cut up like that, but people die all the time, and so I don't think that the mental substance. I believe in an afterlife, so I don't believe that the mental substance has to remain attached to the body.
If you reassembled them, would it
But
be
I'll give you the
reattached?
last word, and then I'll go to Sabrina because
Sure.
she has.
Sorry, I kept continuing on.
No, you're fine.
Just feel free to move on to Sabrina. I just wanted to give a gist of where I intended to take the conversation.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Scott. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Please also look at the show notes in order to find a link to our group so that you can join our next discussion. I look forward to chatting with you.